Hello to everybody, my name is Stefano and welcome to this episode of the Think and Analyze podcast. Today we are dealing with the following question. Why is it hard to think? Now I immediately want to say that there are sort of different levels of thinking in the sense that thinking and planning, for example, what to eat for dinner is one thing, but thinking and trying to find what are, let's say, your values and what is your belief system is way more difficult. So I would say that the more abstract and deep you go, the harder it is. And when I say deep, I mean not just looking for the cause of something, but also looking for the cause of the cause, or maybe finding how that cause relates to another phenomenon. Now, what has led me to do this episode is the fact that I used to think that other people simply don't think. I'll explain better in a second. That was very arrogant. However, I do want to point out that that statement was the result of a series of factors which I understood only after much time, but I will talk about them later. That statement came right at the same time with another assertion which is also quite arrogant. That is, I'm the only one thinking and the only one who is conscious. Therefore, I'm different and probably better than others. That actually sounds and is very hard, but I didn't think that rationally. I didn't actually believe 100% that. However, during conversations with others, they would tell me what they did one day or another day and so on. And the conversation was pleasing, I've got to say. However, it never really went into a discussion about more abstract thoughts which required more thinking. For this reason, I thought that they simply didn't have the ability to think more abstractly. Because what I mean with thinking is thinking about abstract or complicated things. But since I believed I had that sort of ability, which is of course something positive, in my opinion, this led me to believe, that I was actually the only one who thought about those kind of things, and that others were mediocre, like. So my conclusion was justifiable, but it was only because I started from the wrong perspective. It was not a valid reasoning. And deep down I knew that, I guess, even though my conclusion pleased my ego. However, I like to think, as I say in the introduction of this podcast, and the conclusion I had come to was not enough, so I started to think more deeply. So I began by admitting that other people think, which was something that must be true, just like I do. Nevertheless, it was undeniable that what they usually told me was about everyday things and was not abstract or deep at all. So that made me think, is there something about these people that's different from me and could be the reason why they don't talk about abstract things as much as I would do? Looking for the solution to this, I seemed to be unable to find one. So what did I do? I reversed the problem. Is there something about me that makes me unable to talk about everyday things? And then I realized, well, if I wanted to talk about everyday things, I couldn't because I don't usually do as many activities as my friends. Of course, I could talk about this and that, like for example, I could talk about the fact that I played tennis the other day and so on and so forth, but I feel that usually I would run out of things to say before others. So, to recap briefly, it was all about the fact that my friends did different things than me, and so we would end up talking about things that oftentimes were not in the strict interests of mine. To say in other words, I didn't relate to what they would say as often as one would expect, I guess. Of course, however, I listened to them very carefully, because after all, they were talking to me, and as a friend and as a polite person, that's what I should have done. Okay, so far so good. But there was more to that. After all, with all I've said up to this point, I still haven't answered the initial question. Okay, after all this sort of mental process, I asked myself, okay, but thinking does not require as many things as a manual task would. To think, you just have to have a brain, which you should. You don't need to go anywhere to wait a particular time. You can do it wherever and whenever you want. So why don't others think like when they have some spare time? Truth is, thinking requires time and effort. It's not something you do as soon as you have 5 or 10 spare minutes. It requires much more time because it is a continuous effort. And that's because, in order to come to a conclusion, you need to ponder so many aspects. It's not that one thing always implies only and instantly another one, and so it requires a lot of time. Usually it is not strenuous, but often it is mentally tiring. In other words, it requires energy. And perhaps one thing that is often overlooked is that you don't know where you're going. You don't know if you'll come to a conclusion which is solid and useful or not. That might even make it a little bit frustrating. That's why the more physical and manual activities you're involved with, the less you are willing to think, I guess. Not because necessarily you don't want to think, but because you simply don't want to do something which is even more tiring. So if I had done I don't know, if I had been out all day doing things for my job or I don't know, playing some kind of sports, and I get home, I want to relax because I am tired. I am already tired, and I don't want to do anything else. And for this reason, it's not that also you just don't want to think, but you will actually do something else. You simply want to chill, you want to relax. And also, doing things requires you to live more in the moment, so that you are more in your body rather than in your head. And that's something we could also talk about in another episode. Should you be more in your body or in your head? That's really fascinating to me. I would definitely make a podcast on that. And so, yeah, these are, in my opinion, oh well, I should say, at the beginning of this episode, I talked about my sort of experience. Okay, now I listed sort of some aspects which might which might explain why it is hard to think. And now I will explain other three aspects which are crucial, in my opinion. Firstly, thinking requires you to know how you're viewing reality. To put in other words, it requires you to know what your set of premises is, with the set of premises being what we talked about in a previous episode. Now, of course, not knowing your set of premises doesn't make you incapable of thinking. But in my opinion, if you really want to get to the root of things, you need to know how you're viewing reality. Because if you don't know, you will never understand, for example, why you consider something in a way, even if it could totally be considered in another one. And if you don't know that, you won't be able to come to a conclusion because you will basically be stuck with a question that you're not able to answer. Secondly, thinking puts you in a position where you yourself, like on your own, could discover that what you first believed in might instead be something wrong. So you must be willing to give up your perspective to get a new one. But what if you get to the point of realizing that a value or something you believed is wrong and you can't find another to replace it? You, I believe, will feel sort of lost. Last but not least, I would say this is actually the most important aspect. Once you happen to find some sort of truth that you hadn't realized before, like some deep thing that hits you and makes you say, damn, you become aware that potentially everything you believe in might be wrong. And that's actually bad to feel. I personally feel sometimes like this. You concretely, truly feel like you don't know anything and that you're lost. Or at least that is what happened to me a couple of times. So for all these reasons, we can see, of course, that it is hard to think, and I also guess that's why people do not think as much as other people do. However, I really don't think that people who we should say don't think, don't think as much, know all these reasons, and therefore they choose not to think. I actually believe that how they have been raised affects their inclination to think, for the most part. If you are in an environment where there's little intellectual stimulus, I guess that's kind of inevitable that you are less prone to think deeply into things. And we could say that additionally, when, for example, they get to school, those kind of people get to school, or in situations where thinking is required, they unconsciously feel that thinking is not an easy task. And if they don't have someone who actually helps them step by step, they end up only by learning what they have to do, even if, for example, They don't know why they are doing it. But this is not an accusation to the education system at all. What we are talking about is simply something extremely difficult to fix, to understand, to find a solution, I guess. And I want to explain one final thing. All these things I said are not in any way to belittle those who like tend not to think deeply into things. I honestly believe everyone has their own inclinations and interests, and nobody should ever offend someone else because of them. It's not that just because I like to think, I insult someone else who, for example, I don't know, likes to play basketball, and I tell them, "Ha, you are so dumb, but you don't even think about what you're doing." It's not like that. Uh, People have different inclinations, and uh, every one of us has to find theirs and go for them, work on them, um, sort of improve on them. Okay, so that was it for this episode. I hope everything was clear. This episode was a little intricate, and I hope you gained something. Also, I tried to talk a little bit faster than the other episodes because I realized that I really talk very slow, like I'm doing now. I really talk slow, and so the time needed to come to the conclusion of the episode is always too much, I believe. So I will start to talk faster, and I believe, I hope actually, I hope that what I'm saying is, in any case, understandable, and so I hope everything is fine, basically. With that said, see you guys.